Lucy Letby was a nurse entrusted with the most fragile lives, newborn babies fighting for survival. But when a series of unexplained deaths began to rise in the neonatal ward, suspicion fell heavily on her. Was Lucy a cold-hearted killer hiding behind a caring smile, or was she the victim of a terrifying miscarriage of justice? This is the story that shocked a nation and left everyone asking, was baby killer Lucy Letby wrongfully convicted? In a small neonatal unit tucked away in a quiet hospital, the fragile lives of newborn babies depended on the care and vigilance of the nurses who watched over them. Lucy Letby was one of those nurses. Known by many as gentle and dedicated, she spent long hours tending to the tiniest patients who struggled to survive outside their mothers' wombs. The ward was a place of hope and anxiety, where every breath a baby took was precious, and every moment could bring either joy or heartbreak. First, everything seemed normal. The babies were fragile, yes, but many were making slow progress, slowly growing stronger day by day. Lucy moved through the ward quietly, checking monitors and adjusting oxygen levels with careful hands. The other nurses respected her, and families found comfort in her calm presence during their darkest hours. But over time, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Babies who had shown signs of improvement suddenly took sudden and unexplained turns for the worse. Seemingly healthy infants became critically ill without warning. These tragic events occurred more frequently during Lucy's shifts. Staff began to notice that the number of baby deaths and serious illnesses was rising, especially when she was on duty. Whispers spread through the hospital halls, a growing unease settling like a shadow over the neonatal unit. The hospital administration started to take notice. Families who had lost their babies demanded answers, and the staff grew anxious, unsure of what was happening. Investigations began quietly at first, reviewing medical records and checking equipment, but the numbers told a grim story. The babies were dying at an unusually high rate, and the pattern was hard to ignore. The fact that these incidents clustered around Lucy's shifts made her a focus of suspicion. Still, many found it hard to believe that someone so young and seemingly caring could cause such harm. Nurses described Lucy as attentive and sweet, someone who loved babies deeply. The idea that she might be responsible for their deaths was almost impossible to accept. But the evidence continued to mount, and the hospital had to act. Meanwhile, Lucy's own world began to crumble. She faced increasing scrutiny from colleagues and investigators. The warmth she once showed the babies was replaced by cold looks and suspicion. Her every move was watched, and the pressure to explain the tragic losses grew heavier each day. Despite her protests of innocence, Lucy was eventually arrested, shocking the hospital and the wider community. The media quickly labelled her the baby killer nurse, turning her into a figure of fear and hatred. People struggled to reconcile the image of the gentle nurse with the horrific accusations. The small neonatal ward, once a place of fragile hope, had become the centre of a dark mystery. Behind its quiet walls, the line between care and harm blurred, leaving everyone searching for answers. Was Lucy Letby truly the person responsible for the deaths? Or was there something deeper, something no one had yet understood, hiding beneath the surface? As the investigation unfolded, the truth seemed to grow more complicated, raising questions that would haunt the hospital and the nation for years to come. As the investigation into the tragic deaths in the neonatal unit deepened, a mountain of evidence began to take shape, casting a dark shadow over Lucy Letby. Hospital records showed a disturbing trend. A significant number of the infant deaths and serious illnesses coincided precisely with the times Lucy was on duty. These weren't isolated incidents. They formed a pattern that investigators could not ignore. Doctors and forensic experts pored over the baby's medical charts, searching for explanations. They noticed an unusual rise in certain medical emergencies, seizures, sudden collapses, and unexplained cardiac arrests, occurring more often during Lucy's shifts. This spike in cases was unlike anything they had seen before. It was as if the fragile balance of life in the nursery was being repeatedly and deliberately broken. Toxicology tests added another chilling layer to the case. Several of the babies who died or became critically ill showed traces of substances that had no place in their tiny bodies. These chemicals were not part of their treatment, and experts could not explain how they got there. The presence of these poisons raised a terrifying possibility. Someone had deliberately harmed the infants. But it wasn't just medical data that linked Lucy to the deaths. During the search of her home and personal belongings, investigators found handwritten notes and diaries. These documents contained detailed observations about the babies she cared for, describing their symptoms and medical conditions with unsettling precision. Some notes even hinted at knowledge of the baby's deteriorations before others had noticed. The discovery of these notes sent shockwaves through the community. Many saw them as proof of a cold, calculating mind at work. A nurse, who was not only harming babies but meticulously recording her actions. The media seized on this evidence, painting Lucy as a sinister figure, a nightmare hidden behind a nurse's uniform. Yet, despite the growing pile of evidence, some found the case hard to fully accept. The notes were strange, but could they truly prove guilt? Could someone working in such a high-pressure environment be documenting medical observations in a way that seemed clinical rather than criminal? The presence of toxic substances raised questions, but how exactly they entered the babies' bodies remained unclear. The hospital's internal investigation revealed that some safety protocols had been ignored or inadequately followed, and the ward had been under significant strain from staff shortages and heavy workloads. These conditions raised the possibility that mistakes or accidents could have contributed to the tragic outcomes, complicating the search for truth. Still, the overwhelming focus was on Lucy. The combination of statistical data, toxicology findings, and her personal notes made a compelling case for prosecutors. The courtroom became the stage where this evidence would be examined, debated, and challenged. As the trial approached, the atmosphere grew tense. The public wanted answers, justice, and closure. Families of the victims waited for accountability. Lucy faced the heaviest burden of all, a presumption of guilt that would shape her fate. But beneath the layers of evidence lay unanswered questions, and the line between fact and suspicion began to blur. The unfolding drama revealed how fragile trust could be in a place meant for healing. It exposed the terrifying possibility that someone entrusted with protecting the most vulnerable might also be the cause of their suffering. The case of Lucy Letby gripped the nation, but the full story was far from simple, and the truth remained just out of reach. As the investigation into Lucy Letby's case progressed, cracks began to appear in the seemingly straightforward story. While the evidence against her looked strong on the surface, deeper examination revealed that things might not be so clear-cut. The hospital environment was chaotic, with staff stretched thin, and the pressure on everyone running high. These conditions made it difficult to separate genuine wrongdoing from tragic accidents. Experts outside the initial investigation started questioning the conclusions drawn by the hospital and authorities. Neonatal care is a field filled with complexity. Babies in these units are incredibly vulnerable, and sudden deteriorations can happen even under the best care. Some specialists argued that the high number of deaths and illnesses could be explained by an outbreak of infection or by medical complications unrelated to any deliberate harm. Whistleblowers from within the hospital soon came forward, revealing details that had been overlooked or ignored. One nurse described how the neonatal ward was frequently understaffed, with tired employees forced to cover long shifts. Another spoke about how medical equipment sometimes malfunctioned or was in short supply, creating an unsafe environment for the babies. These revelations painted a picture of systemic problems rather than a single individual's malicious actions. More troubling were claims that the internal investigation had been rushed. Some staff believed the hospital was desperate to close the case quickly, fearing the reputational damage that prolonged scrutiny could cause. This urgency may have led to critical evidence being dismissed or not fully explored. For instance, infection control reports showed there were signs of a bacterial outbreak in the ward around the same time as many of the deaths, information that had not been highlighted during the trial. The question of motive also puzzled many. Why would a nurse dedicated to caring for the most fragile patients suddenly begin harming them? Psychologists involved in the case noted that Lucy's behavior did not fit typical profiles of medical offenders. She had no prior record of violence or misconduct and was described by colleagues as kind and compassionate. Some suggested that she might be a scapegoat, an unfortunate target chosen because the hospital needed someone to blame. The presence of the handwritten notes was re-examined as well. While some saw them as evidence of guilt, others argued they could have been a way for Lucy to cope with the stress and trauma of working in such a difficult environment. Nurses often keep detailed notes to monitor their patients' conditions carefully, and these could have been misinterpreted as sinister. As public opinion wavered, legal experts began to highlight inconsistencies in the prosecution's case. They questioned whether the toxicology reports conclusively proved intentional poisoning, or if the substances found could have come from contaminated equipment or medication errors. The statistical link between Lucy's shifts and the deaths was strong, but did not automatically mean she was responsible. Correlation does not always equal causation. This growing doubt created a tense atmosphere as the trial approached. Families of the victims struggled to come to terms with the possibility that justice might not be as clear as they hoped. Meanwhile, Lucy remained isolated, facing not only legal charges, but a cloud of suspicion that seemed impossible to lift. The case was no longer just about numbers and evidence. It was about the truth behind a tragedy, the failures of a hospital system, and whether an innocent person could be caught in the crossfire. The story grew more complex, challenging everyone to look beyond first impressions and ask difficult questions about how justice is served in the face of grief and fear. As the investigation into the deaths in the neonatal unit unfolded, new evidence emerged that challenged the initial assumptions about Lucy Letby's guilt. Scientists and medical experts began to dig deeper into the medical data and found signs of a serious infection spreading through the ward, one that had gone unnoticed or unaddressed for months. This discovery introduced a startling alternative explanation for the baby's sudden declines and deaths. Infections in neonatal units are not uncommon, especially when hygiene protocols are difficult to maintain under pressure. But what made this outbreak particularly deadly was the fact that it was caused by a resistant strain of bacteria that was difficult to treat. Despite efforts to control it, the infection quietly spread from baby to baby, causing rapid deterioration in those already vulnerable. Experts believed this could explain many of the medical emergencies that had been blamed on deliberate harm. Hospital records showed gaps in infection control procedures and lapses in cleaning routines. Staff shortages meant that some essential sanitation tasks were missed and equipment was reused without proper sterilization. These failings allowed the bacteria to thrive in the neonatal environment, putting every infant at risk. The possibility that the tragic deaths were linked to these failures rather than intentional acts by a nurse brought the case into a new light. Meanwhile, questions about the hospital's management began to surface. Investigations revealed that hospital administrators had downplayed the severity of the infection outbreak, fearing that admitting the problem would lead to a public scandal. Instead of addressing the root cause, they seemed eager to find a single person to blame, hoping to contain the damage quickly. This created a strong incentive to focus suspicion on Lucy Letby. The narrative of a baby killer nurse was simpler and more immediate than confronting systemic problems that would require costly changes and public accountability. Some insiders suggested that Lucy was being used as a scapegoat to protect the hospital's reputation and avoid a larger crisis. The hidden truths behind the infection outbreak sparked intense debate among medical experts, lawyers, and the public. Some argued that the hospital's failings had directly contributed to the baby's deaths, and that blaming Lucy diverted attention from these dangerous issues. Others believed that even if infections were a factor, it didn't completely rule out the possibility of harmful actions by an individual. This growing controversy complicated the legal case. Defense attorneys pushed to introduce evidence of the infection outbreak and hospital negligence, arguing that it raised reasonable doubt about Lucy's guilt. Prosecutors resisted, fearing that these claims could weaken their case and lead to public sympathy for Lucy. Meanwhile, families of the victims found themselves caught between two painful realities: the loss of their children and the unfolding questions about what really happened. Many wanted answers, but the truth seemed to slip further away as the story grew more complicated. The investigation exposed more than just a possible miscarriage of justice. It revealed how fragile the healthcare system can be, how easily trust can be broken, and how the pressure to find a culprit can overshadow the search for real solutions. The tragic deaths in the neonatal unit were not just about one nurse. They were about a hospital struggling to protect its most vulnerable patients and the devastating consequences when it failed. As the courtroom battle loomed, the hidden truths threatened to unravel the official story. The question lingered: was Lucy Letby truly responsible, or had she been caught in a web of institutional failure and fear? The answer was no longer clear, and the case took on a haunting complexity that gripped the nation. The courtroom was packed with tension as Lucy Letby's trial reached its climax. The prosecution presented a compelling case, laying out the evidence piece by piece: the suspicious timing of the baby deaths, the toxicology results, and the notes found in Lucy's possession. To many, it seemed undeniable that she was responsible. For the heartbreaking tragedies in the neonatal unit, the judge and jury faced the difficult task of weighing complex medical facts and emotional testimonies to decide her fate. However, the defense fought fiercely, challenging the narrative of guilt. They highlighted the hospital's systemic failures, the possible infection outbreak, and the questionable handling of evidence during the investigation. Experts testified about how difficult it was to be certain of intent in a ward filled with vulnerable babies, and how the pressures of such an environment could lead to tragic accidents without any wrongdoing. They argued that Lucy had been made a scapegoat to shield the hospital from criticism and financial fallout. As the trial unfolded, public opinion became divided. Some saw Lucy as a monster who had betrayed the most innocent, demanding justice for the families who lost their babies. Others began to question whether fear and grief had clouded judgment, and if Lucy was an innocent woman crushed by a flawed system. The media played a powerful role in shaping these views, with headlines swinging between condemnation and sympathy. When the verdict came, Lucy was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. The courtroom erupted with mixed reactions: relief from some, disbelief from others. The judge acknowledged the tragedy and suffering, but emphasized the importance of justice for the victims. For Lucy, the sentence was a devastating end to a life forever marked by suspicion and loss. Yet even after the verdict, controversy lingered. Advocates for Lucy and independent experts continued to raise questions about the case. Appeals were filed, focusing on the possibility that new evidence about infections and hospital negligence had not been fully considered. The debate extended beyond the courtroom into society's broader conversation about accountability, medical error, and the human cost of blame. Families of the victims were left grappling with mixed emotions. Some felt justice had been served, while others struggled with doubts planted by the emerging complexities of the case. The hospital itself faced investigations and criticism over its handling of the outbreak and its response to the crisis. Policies were reviewed and reforms introduced in an effort to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Lucy Letby's story remains a haunting reminder of how fragile trust can be in places meant to protect life. It forces us to consider how fear and grief can shape our understanding of guilt, how difficult it is to find certainty amid tragedy, and how systems can fail the most vulnerable. Whether Lucy was truly guilty or wrongfully convicted may never be fully resolved, but her case continues to challenge the way we think about justice, responsibility, and compassion. The story closes on a somber note, leaving viewers to reflect on the fragile line between innocence and guilt, the price of seeking truth, and the haunting question that remains: was justice truly served, or was an innocent life destroyed in the pursuit of closure?